Intro: the truth about Keith Lee and Michin's divorce is finally out. For months, fans had no idea the couple had quietly gone their separate ways. Now Michin has broken her silence, and the real story behind their split is shocking. Let me break it down. So Michin just answered a question fans have been asking since WrestleMania season. And she did it in a TikTok comment section, not a headline. For over a year, something had quietly ended between her and Keith Lee, and nobody outside their circle knew it. The truth about Keith Lee and Michin's divorce is finally out, confirmed in her own words. And the story behind it says a lot about what happens when two wrestlers try to keep a marriage private, while their careers pull them in completely different directions. Here's exactly how it came out, and what it means for both of them going forward. It started with a dance video. Michin, you probably know her as Mia Yim, the WWE SmackDown star currently aligned with Jade Cargill and BFAB, posted a TikTok of herself learning a routine from a professional dancer. It was self-deprecating, a joke about being an athlete who can't dance. Nothing about her marriage, nothing about Keith Lee, just a video. Then the comments took over. Michin, the WWE superstar formerly known as Mia Yim, posted a TikTok this week of herself learning a routine from professional dancer Seth Hill. And it was a dance video that had nothing to do with her love life. Then the comments found a different subject. A user asked in effect when this had happened, writing, "I ain't know her and Keith split where I been at." Somebody in that thread clearly hadn't gotten the memo. Because apparently there was a memo, it just never got sent. Another commenter jumped in to correct the record, insisting the two were still together. And that's when Michin herself stepped into her own comment section and settled it from her verified account. She replied, "We are not," 2 words, no explanation. No context, just a flat correction to a stranger arguing about her love life under a dance video. But here's the thing, that reply alone didn't actually confirm a divorce. It settled nothing because not being together and being divorced are not the same claim. And she had only made the first one. "We are not together" could mean a breakup. It could mean a separation. Fans were left guessing all over again. So a second moment happened, this time under an older post entirely. A throwback where a fan had once commented that Keith Lee was one lucky man. Under that older post, a commenter had written that Keith Lee was one lucky man. Another user replied that the two had separated. And Michin, seemingly going back to a day-old post just to reply, dropped into that thread with one word. That word was divorced. No statement, no press release, no sit-down interview with a wrestling outlet. That was the entire announcement. No statement, no post, no interview, no publicist. Just a correction to a stranger under a video about dancing. And then a second correction under an older video. And once that word landed, it didn't stay contained to TikTok. Within hours, it was everywhere. Fightful, Wrestling Inc., F4W, Cageside Seats, all picking up the same 3 exchanges and trying to figure out the timeline. Because Michin didn't stop at divorced, a fan asked her directly when it happened, and she gave an actual window. When one fan asked when Mia Yim and Keith Lee broke up, she wrote, "Over a year ago." Read that again, over a year. Meaning the marriage had already ended, quietly, sometime in 2025. And the wrestling world had spent that entire stretch assuming Keith Lee and Michin were still husband and wife. That's the part that actually stunned people. Not that a wrestling couple split, that happens. It's that this particular couple had built a real public following as a pair. Fans had watched them go through releases, injuries, comebacks together for years. And the ending arrived as a footnote under a stranger's comment about a dance routine. Once the word divorced was out there, the reactions started stacking up fast. And not all of them were kind. Michin addressed that too, posting on X shortly after the TikTok comments blew up. She wrote, "Slow news days I guess, waking up to some love and some misogynistic comments, figures. We both are still friends and got nothing but love for each other. Go outside, get some sun, drink some water, and have a good day." That posted 2 things at once. It confirmed there was nothing bitter behind the split. She called out anyone treating it as scandal. And she made a point of saying she and Keith Lee were still on good terms. But it also revealed something else. She was getting hit with ugly comments the second this came out. Comments aimed specifically at her as a woman, not at him. That detail matters, and we're going to come back to it. Meanwhile, Keith Lee himself said nothing. Not a word, not a like, not a subtweet. And if you've followed his last few years in AEW, that silence isn't exactly out of character. It's basically his default setting these days. Because while Michin's been building a second act on SmackDown, Keith Lee has been living through one of the strangest disappearing acts in modern wrestling. And that absence is a huge part of why nobody even had eyes on this marriage to notice it had already ended. So that's the moment, the TikTok comment, the "we are not." The one word divorced, the year-plus gap nobody caught. Now let's go back and actually build out how these two got here in the first place. Because the story of Keith Lee and Michin didn't start with an ending. It started with two beat-up indie wrestlers finding each other inside a company that nearly buried them both. To understand how big this news actually is, you have to understand what Keith Lee and Mia Yim meant to each other's careers before any of this. This wasn't a couple who met at a red carpet event or through mutual celebrity friends. This was two independent wrestlers who found each other inside the same grind, years before either of them had a WWE contract worth anything. Yim and Lee first connected as colleagues in WWE's NXT developmental system, with their relationship beginning sometime between 2018 and 2020, and their romance grew as both advanced their careers. This was during the golden years of NXT under the Black and Yellow brand, the era that turned Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano, and a dozen other independent stars into legitimate crossover names. Keith Lee was a mountain of a man who moved like a cruiserweight, and by mid-2020, he was doing something nobody in that division had done before. The Limitless One created history by becoming the first to hold the NXT and the North American titles at the same time, with Lee having been the North American champion coming into the clash against Adam Cole. That match happened at what was called the Great American Bash, and it was one of those nights where an entire arena full of hardcore wrestling fans lost their minds over a guy nobody outside the tape trading community had heard of 2 years earlier. And right there in the celebration photos, standing next to him, was Mia Yim. While many NXT and WWE stars wished Lee on his success, the best celebrations come with the ones you are closest to. Lee and Yim had been in a relationship for a while, and the WWE couple were pictured together celebrating. It wasn't a staged photo op, it was two people who had actually built something together outside the cameras, catching a genuine huge night for one of them. Yim wasn't just standing on the sidelines either, she had her own run going. Yim battled NXT champion Charlotte around that same period, while Lee, as NXT North American champion, defended his title in a triple threat match against Dominik Dijakovic and Damian Priest. Two parallel storylines, two people climbing the same ladder at the same company, dating the entire time and mostly keeping it low-key. But NXT stardom is one thing. The main roster is where WWE has chewed up and spit out dozens of guys who looked unstoppable in Full Sail. And that's exactly what happened next. Keith Lee got called up to Raw in August of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, wrestling in front of a fake crowd on a soundstage in Orlando with zero momentum behind him. And almost immediately, his body betrayed him. Lee was called up to the Raw brand in August 2020, but faced disruptions due to health issues, including a severe bout with COVID-19 and subsequent heart inflammation, which kept him sidelined for a significant period. That's not a small thing to gloss over. Heart inflammation in an active pro wrestler is the kind of diagnosis that ends careers. He was gone from television for months, and the reporting at the time didn't make it any clearer why. Fans were left connecting dots from a distance, and one of the only people who could have actually explained anything was staying quiet. When a fan pushed Mia Yim for details during his mystery absence, she shut it down fast. Following a report denying Lee had been released, Mia Yim replied to a fan comment on the news and stated, "It's no one's business." That line right there, "it's no one's business," is basically the entire operating philosophy this couple ran on for the next 5 years. Whatever was happening to Keith Lee's body, whatever was happening in their relationship, that was theirs. Not a storyline for public consumption. When Lee finally did return to Raw that July, the show hyped it as a triumphant comeback. But behind the scenes, something was clearly off. Yim was coming off a forgettable Retribution stint, while Lee's push had been abruptly stopped a few months prior. And a former WWE head writer stated the real-life couple had legit heat within the company, comparing it to the heat Lana and Rusev had once carried. Whether or not that backstage politics angle was accurate, both of their pushes cratered around the same time, and neither ever got the runway back that NXT had given them. By November of 2021, the axe fell. Keith Lee was one of 18 names cut in a round of WWE releases that stunned the wrestling world. A former double champion let go with barely an explanation. And within weeks, Mia Yim was let go too, in the same wave of cuts. That's the part people forget when they think about this couple. They didn't just fall in love inside a wrestling company. They got fired from the same wrestling company in the same stretch of time, and had to figure out what came next together, as a couple with both of their careers in free fall simultaneously. And instead of that breaking them, it seems to have pushed them closer. Michin and Lee were married in February of 2022. having announced their engagement on February 11, 2021, and tied the knot shortly after both were released from WWE. Read that timeline again: engaged while they were both still under WWE contract, and married within months of getting cut loose from the company that made them famous. That's not the sequence of two people drifting toward a wedding out of convenience. That's two people who'd already survived the worst version of the industry together, and decided to make it permanent right as the ground was shifting under both of them. Keith Lee actually talked about the wedding itself not long after, describing it warmly in an interview. He called the event very over the top, describing it as a Disney wedding, something Mia had wanted and that he was able to provide for her. He talked about the dancing, the food, watching people enjoy themselves. It read like a guy who was genuinely happy, genuinely proud of building that day for his new wife. At that exact moment, both of their careers were about to take dramatically different paths. Yim would eventually find her way back into WWE. Lee would sign with a completely different promotion and briefly become one of the most electric acts on that roster, before the wheels came off in a way nobody saw coming. And that split path is exactly where the story turns next. Once the WWE releases hit, Keith Lee and Mia Yim didn't stay unemployed for long, but they went in completely opposite directions. And that divergence is the real engine of everything that came after. Lee signed with AEW almost immediately, and the reaction from wrestling fans was enormous. The Limitless One made his impactful AEW debut in February 2022. And in AEW, Lee formed a popular and successful tag team with Swerve Strickland, known as Swerve in Our Glory. His first match alone became a viral moment. Upon his arrival in AEW, Lee's first match was against Isaiah Cassidy, and within seconds, Lee tossed him across the ring, creating another shareable moment that lived forever on social media. For a guy who'd been buried on the WWE main roster, this felt like vindication, a promotion that actually knew how to use him. That tag team with Swerve Strickland turned into one of AEW's most talked about pairings, and it paid off in gold. Lee signed with AEW in 2022 following his WWE release, and not long after debuting, captured the AEW Tag Team Championship alongside Swerve Strickland. For a stretch there, Keith Lee looked like exactly what everybody thought he'd be back in his NXT prime. A genuine main event threat with a title around his waist and a red-hot partner alongside him. But like almost everything in Keith Lee's career, it didn't stay smooth. The team split turned into a rivalry, and then his body did what it had done before. Keith Lee signed with AEW in 2022 and had a successful tag team run alongside Swerve Strickland. But shortly after the team broke up, the Limitless One went on hiatus due to health issues. His last match came at the end of 2023. Lee did not wrestle for the entirety of 2024 and has not competed in 2025 so far. His most recent match took place on an episode of Collision in December 2023, defeating Brian Cage. And he was supposed to wrestle at AEW's World's End pay-per-view at the end of that year, before having to withdraw due to an undisclosed injury. That match against Cage was supposed to be a tune-up for a much bigger showdown with Strickland at the promotion's biggest year-end show. Instead, he vanished from it entirely. What followed was more than a year of vague, cryptic updates. In an update shared to fans, Lee said it took roughly 19 years, but it was apparently his turn. Joking time to get fixed, here's to double surgeries. Certainly one way to start 2024. Double surgeries, undisclosed nature, no timetable. That's the entire information fans had to work with for the better part of 2 years. Every few months, Lee would surface with a message that gave hope without giving specifics. He wrote at one point, "You have my appreciation, I am quite well. Only time will tell when or where, but I am confident that time will come. Have patience, my friend." Encouraging, vague, repeated in one form or another, across nearly 2 years of AEW programming running without him. By mid-2025, he was still telling fans the same basic thing. Responding to a fan on X, Lee said, "Again, I am quite fine. It is not up to me when it comes to a return, but blessings to you as well." He wasn't hiding that he was healthy. He was making clear the decision to bring him back wasn't in his hands. Now, while all of that was happening to her husband, Mia Yim was building something completely different a few states and a few TV deals away. She'd already returned to WWE by this point, this time under a new name and a new attitude. In 2022, Yim marked her return to WWE by joining the OC alongside AJ Styles, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows, and now she's currently aligned with BFAB and former WWE Women's Champion Jade Cargill on the SmackDown brand. Two completely different pictures. One half of this marriage was actively wrestling on national television every week, aligned with a hot faction, building new momentum. The other half hadn't been seen in a wrestling ring in years, tethered to a contract but absent from the shows, giving fans nothing but reassurances on social media that he was fine. And through all of it, they were still, publicly at least, presented as a couple. Fans saw them together on social media as recently as the turn of this year. Fans got a look at him on X Twitter alongside his wife and dog, appearing in good shape with Yim writing, "Thank you for an incredible 2024. Can't wait to see what 2025 has in store for us all. Manifesting success, be safe tonight, don't drink and drive." That post is worth sitting with for a second because we now know, based on what Michin herself said in that TikTok comment thread, that by the time she wrote those words, the two of them had probably already ended their marriage. If the over a year ago timeline holds up, that New Year's post came after the split, not before it. Two people still photographed together, still publicly warm with each other, already divorced behind the scenes. That's not a contradiction though, not for these two. Remember, this is the same couple who told fans years earlier that whatever was going on with them was, in her exact words, nobody's business. Keeping a divorce quiet while still being cordial enough to post together isn't inconsistent with who they'd always been, it's actually consistent with it. So while wrestling media spent 2024 and 2025 speculating about when Keith Lee would return to a ring, and while WWE fans spent that same stretch watching Michin thrive in a new faction, the actual headline, the end of their marriage, was sitting there completely unreported, known only to the two of them. Which brings us to the moment fans actually started noticing something was off. Months before the TikTok comments finally confirmed it. Here's the thing about wrestling fandom, it's obsessive and it's observant. And in the months before Michin's TikTok comments went public, some fans had already started clocking that something didn't add up. Despite Keith Lee and Mia Yim being on record about keeping their relationship private, the fact the pair hadn't been seen together in a while started to become a topic on the Wrestle Web around WrestleMania this year. That's a specific detail worth pausing on. It wasn't random internet gossip. It was a pattern. Two people who used to show up in each other's social media, who used to be photographed together at shows and events, simply stopped appearing together. And wrestling fans, the same community that tracks injury reports and creative notes like detectives, started asking questions. Meanwhile, Keith Lee's actual wrestling status kept generating its own separate stream of speculation, completely disconnected from his marriage. Reports throughout 2025 kept circling the same question: was he actually coming back? By spring, Lee's status had changed, as he declared he'd been healthy for some time, and remained confident he'd return to the ring. And a report emerged indicating Lee was backstage at an AEW Dynamite taping, though he still hadn't returned to the promotion. Backstage but not on TV, healthy but not booked. That's the strange purgatory Keith Lee occupied for nearly 2 years, and it fed directly into how his marriage news landed later. Because when Michin finally did confirm the divorce, industry voices immediately tied the two threads together. His career limbo and the end of his marriage, even though there's no confirmation the two are connected. One of wrestling media's most plugged-in reporters addressed exactly that tension the same week the divorce broke. Brian Alvarez, speaking on his show, made clear he was relaying industry chatter rather than confirmed reporting. But the chatter was blunt. Alvarez said that while he doesn't personally know anything about the situation, people in wrestling think Lee is done competing in the ring, adding, "Everyone has been asking what's going on with Keith Lee. Is he ever coming back to AEW, and are we ever going to get that match with Swerve?" Well, all I can tell you is that, this has been discussed within the business. Obviously with this news coming out as well. There's been a lot of talk about Keith Lee over the last couple of days. And then he went further from talking to people. The belief within the business is that Keith Lee is done. Not that he's done with AEW and might resurface elsewhere, but that he's likely just retired. That's a heavy thing to have said about you the same week your divorce becomes public. Two separate, massive pieces of your life, your marriage and your career, both being openly discussed as effectively over within days of each other by people who don't actually work for you. And the timing lines up in a way that's hard to ignore. Lee himself has not posted on social media since September 2025, which is the same month he tweeted that he would certainly be making an in-ring return, but didn't know how or when it would happen. So Keith Lee's own voice, the one thing fans had been relying on for 2 years of vague reassurance, went completely silent right around the same window his marriage was reportedly ending for good. No timeline claims should be treated as certain, but the overlap is the reason. This whole story is generating so much conversation right now. There's also a business angle nobody was really tracking until this broke. Fightful Select, one of the more reliable insider outlets in wrestling journalism, had reported earlier this year that his promotion had internally discussed bringing him back. The most recent report on Lee's status came from Fightful Select, who wrote in June that AEW had discussed a potential Lee return a number of months ago. But the report said Lee has not been backstage at AEW shows, and it's not known if he was even made aware of the idea for his return. Read that carefully, a company discussing bringing back a signed talent, without that talent apparently even knowing the conversation was happening. That's not the profile of an active, engaged wrestler waiting on a green light. That's the profile of someone the business has started planning around rather than planning with. So by the time Michin's TikTok comments actually surfaced, there were already two separate storylines quietly building toward the same conclusion. His career stalling out completely, and his marriage having ended without public acknowledgement. Fans just didn't have the full picture yet, they had scattered pieces. No joint photos since some point in 2025. No ring return despite years of soon. And total silence from one half of a couple that used to at least occasionally show up online together. What they didn't have was confirmation. And that's exactly what changed the moment those TikTok replies started circulating, turning quiet speculation into an actual, on-the-record admission from the person who'd know best. Which takes us to how the wrestling world actually reacted once the word divorced was sitting there in black and white. Impossible to argue with. Once divorced was confirmed, the wrestling media machine moved fast. And so did the fans, many of whom clearly weren't ready for it. Outlet after outlet ran with the same core reporting within hours of each other. Cageside seats framed it around Keith Lee's broader pattern of privacy, noting that even before his ongoing and still mysterious disappearance from AEW programming, former NXT champ Keith Lee was a pretty private person. And while it was known that he and Michin Yim were married, she was on record saying, "We like to keep our love private." That detail, "we like to keep our love private," is doing a lot of work when you look back at it now. It wasn't just a nice sentiment about a private couple. It was, in hindsight, basically the operating manual for exactly how this divorce would eventually surface. Quietly, indirectly, and only when fans forced the question. Fightful, one of the more measured outlets in the space, actually closed their report by stepping back from the drama entirely. Fightful wishes them both the best moving forward and will respect their privacy on the matter. That's a notably restrained way to close a story that other outlets were treating as a bombshell. A sign that even wrestling media, an industry not exactly known for holding back, recognized this wasn't really meant for public consumption in the first place. But not every piece of coverage stayed that respectful. Men's Journal. A detailed breakdown of exactly how the TikTok exchange unfolded. And one line from that coverage cuts right to why this story spread the way it did. That was the entire announcement, no statement, no post. No interview, no publicist, just a correction to a stranger. Under a video about dancing, and then a second correction under an older video. The contrast between how massive this news was, and how casually it arrived is exactly what made it impossible for fans to look away from. Fans themselves split into a few camps in the comments across every platform. One group focused entirely on the timeline math, trying to figure out exactly when over a year ago actually landed, cross-referencing old joint social media posts to guess at the real breakup date. Another group focused on Keith Lee's continued silence, wondering aloud whether his absence from the conversation was tied to his broader disappearance from wrestling altogether, or simply a guy choosing not to litigate his personal life online, consistent with everything he's ever said about privacy. And then there was the group Michin directly called out herself. The ones who couldn't just take the news at face value and instead turned it into something ugly. That's what her own follow-up post was responding to. She'd already given people the two words they were asking for. "We are not and divorced." And instead of that being the end of it, she woke up to a pile of comments that weren't just curious, they were hostile. And specifically hostile toward her. Her response wasn't defensive. It was almost weary, telling people to log off, get some sun, drink some water. The kind of reply you give when you're not angry so much as tired of having to manage other people's reactions to your own life. What's notable is what didn't happen. There was no leaked court filing making rounds, no paparazzi photo, no anonymous insider dropping salacious detail about why the marriage ended. for a divorce involving two recognizable names in an industry that runs on gossip. The actual substance of what went wrong has stayed almost entirely private. Every outlet that covered this, including the biggest wrestling sites in the business, ran essentially the same three quotes. "We are not divorced over a year ago," because that's genuinely all there was to report. That restraint is unusual, and it says something about how these two conducted themselves even in the process of ending a marriage. There was no scorched earth subtweeting, no dueling statements, no side-taking from friends within the business. Everyone who's spoken about it, from reporters to fellow wrestlers, has stuck to logistics and speculation about the timeline, not character attacks or blame. Even the online chatter, once it moved past the initial shock, mostly landed in a strange, sympathetic place. This wasn't being treated like typical celebrity gossip. It was being treated more like two people the wrestling audience had rooted for individually, and now had to root for separately. Comment sections that started out mocking the misogynistic tone Michin had called out actually shifted, with plenty of fans pushing back on the ugliness and instead wishing both of them well. A rare moment of a wrestling comment section policing its own behavior. So the reaction in the end wasn't really a pylon. It was surprise, followed by a scramble for details that never really came, followed by most of the noise settling into something closer to genuine well wishes for two people who'd clearly kept things about themselves for a reason. Which leaves one last piece of this story, where both of them actually stand now, separately, and what happens from here. So here's where things actually sit. Once you strip away the speculation and just look at what's confirmed. Michin is, by every account, in the middle of a genuine second act. She's aligned with Jade Cargill and B-Fab on SmackDown, actively wrestling, actively building a character, actively part of the weekly conversation around WWE programming. Her career didn't just survive the marriage ending. From the outside, it looks like it barely paused. She kept posting, kept performing, kept showing up, all while carrying news she hadn't shared publicly. That takes something. Whatever was happening privately over that year-plus stretch, she was still stepping into an arena every week, still doing interviews, still building storylines with her faction, all without a single public crack in the armor until a stranger in a TikTok comment section forced the question. When she finally did answer, she did it directly without spin, and then immediately shut down the ugliness that followed. That's a pretty clear picture of someone who's already processed this, and moved past the hardest part of it long before the rest of us found out. Keith Lee's situation is murkier, and honestly sadder in a lot of ways. He remains on paper a signed talent. Lee, 41, remains under contract with AEW, but has not wrestled since December 2023, though he stated in summer 2025 that his health had been good for a while. That's the frustrating core of his story. He's told fans repeatedly that he's fine, that he's healthy, that a return is coming. And yet the calendar keeps turning, and it never actually arrives. The company itself has apparently thought about bringing him back, discussed it internally, and then never followed through in any way Lee himself was even necessarily aware of. That's not a guy being pushed out the door with an announcement. That's a guy fading out of a promotion by omission, one quiet month at a time, while his own outward messaging keeps insisting nothing is wrong. And now, on top of a career that industry insiders openly believe might be finished, he's also processing, or has already processed privately over a year ago, the end of his marriage. Two of the biggest structural pillars of a person's adult life, both apparently collapsing around the same stretch of time, and both handled with almost total public silence. It's worth remembering what actually built this relationship in the first place, because it makes the quiet ending land differently. This wasn't two celebrities who met at an event and got swept into a relationship for cameras. This was two indie wrestlers who found each other grinding toward the same dream, who got released by the same company in the same wave of cuts, who chose to get married in the middle of that uncertainty rather than after things got easier. Michin and Lee always received adoration from fans for supporting each other through tremendous personal struggles, such as Lee first being let go by WWE, his prolonged health struggles, or Yim's release from the company and her grind back into it. That's the foundation. That's why this news actually mattered to people beyond typical tabloid curiosity, because fans had watched this couple survive real hardship together for years before any of this. And that's exactly why Michin's own words matter so much here, more than any outside reporting could. She didn't frame this as some ugly falling out. She was specific about it: still friends, still love for each other, just no longer a couple. That's not the language of two people who ended things in conflict. That's the language of two people whose paths simply diverged. One building forward in one company, one stuck in limbo in another. and somewhere in that gap quietly, without any of us watching, a marriage that started with a Disney wedding and a shared fight for survival in this industry came to its own quiet end. Neither of them owes anyone the details beyond what's already been said. That's been the entire posture of this relationship from day one, going all the way back to that flat, "it's no one's business" response years ago. What's changed is simply that after a year of silence, one fan asked the right question under the wrong video, and the truth finally had somewhere to land. Sources: Mia Yim confirms divorce from Keith Lee, F4W1. WWE's Mia Yim confirms she and AEW star Keith Lee are divorced, Wrestling Inc. Mia Michin Yim reveals she and Keith Lee are divorced, Cage-Side Seats. Michin says she and former WWE star Keith Lee are divorced, No DQ. Michin Mia Yim confirms she and Keith Lee are divorced, Fightful. Female WWE star reveals divorce from AEW star to fans through TikTok comments, Men's Journal. WWE's Mia Yim confirms she and AEW star Keith Lee are divorced, Yahoo. Michin confirms she and Keith Lee are divorced, Wrestling News. Michin confirms divorce from Keith Lee, says they split over a year ago, Wrestling Headlines. Female WWE star reveals divorce from AEW star, Yahoo. Michin confirms divorce from Keith Lee, Web is Jericho. Keith Lee's AEW absence and long list of health issues, explained The Sportster. AEW News: Keith Lee provides health update amid absence, F4W1. Keith Lee shares update on AEW status, health concerns persist, Wrestling News source. Keith Lee spotted for the first time in months amid AEW absence, Sportskeeda. Keith Lee update amid long AEW absence, F4W1. Keith Lee provides major update on his health and AEW status, SI. Update on Keith Lee amidst AEW absence, ITR Wrestling. Keith Lee reiterates health and career status amid long-standing AEW absence, Wrestling Inc. Popular AEW wrestler breaks silence on mysterious absence, Newsweek. Keith Lee gives update on potential in-ring return, Yahoo Sports. Breaking: WWE's Michin shares heartbreaking personal update involving Keith Lee, ITR Wrestling. Photos: Mia Yim and Keith Lee celebrate as Limitless One wins NXT title, media referee. Mia Yim comments on Keith Lee's WWE absence, Cultaholic. Big time heat on that couple, WWE veteran opens up on Keith Lee and Mia Yim's struggles, Sportskeeda. Keith Lee the Sportster. Keith Lee on joining AEW, Bearcat nickname reaction, COVID and more, Bleacher Report, https://bleacherreport.com/articles/2,953,956